Shalom, Izzy here with Holy Language Institute at holylanguage.com. I just finished a Mishnah snapshots lesson looking at some similarities between the Mishnah and the New Testament. So, they both come from the same Jewish world. The Mishnah was all of the earliest Jewish interpretations of the Bible, and then, they were written down. Originally, it was all communicated word of mouth, memorized word for word. And then it was finally written down in the late 100s when it was in danger of being lost. So, some of the Mishnah is from the time of Yeshua and then, his apostles who wrote the New Testament. Some of it is even from before then. And so really, there's some things in the Mishnah that can help us to understand the Jewish world of Jesus and his disciples better. And that's where I find the Mishnah really interesting. And I want to show you an example of that today. So this is one of the things I just covered in the lesson. This is in the second of the six orders of the Mishnah in the second tractate. It's called Eruvin, and it's really interesting. This whole tractate is so interesting. For instance, I'll just share one thing with you in brief. I go into this in detail in the lesson, but there's this way that people would go from their individual houses, and they would contribute to a common loaf of bread or a common cup of wine, and then all of their houses would be regarded as one legal entity, as a community. And so basically the cup made them all one. The bread made them all one. All right, you can probably see the connection there, right? But this was a legal thing in Jewish law. And of course, this was something that Paul knew about. He grew up, in Jerusalem, learning at the feet of Gamliel. And so anyways, that's what this whole tractate is about, Eruvin, some stuff like that. But the phrase I wanted to show you here, and the Hebrew word I wanted to show you here is, this is in, where is it exactly? Chapter 5, verse 9. So Rabbi Akiva said to them, "Do you not agree with me that da-da-da-da-da?" And then they go into some, a legal discussion and some technical stuff. Now, I wanted to show you the Hebrew for this because it's really going to help us to understand our relationship with God better and also understand our discipleship to Yeshua of Nazareth. All right, so Amar, he said, Lahen, to them, Rabbi, that's Rabbi, Akiva, I atem, so don't you modim. That's the word I want to look at with you. And don't get scared off here. We're almost done looking at the Hebrew here, okay? If you've never seen Hebrew before, hopefully this is kind of cool for you, but I don't want to overwhelm you. Maybe you saw how we were reading from right to left. If you've never seen Hebrew before, you're like, "Whoa, what was that?" Well, now you know what that was. Hebrew reads from right to left. I'm left-handed, so I kind of like that. Do you know why? Because if I'm actually writing in Hebrew, when I write from right to left, and so my hand doesn't smear over the part that I already wrote. I used to journal a lot. In my teens, I literally have thousands of pages of journaling. And I used to journal with a pencil. And so guess what? Every night I would sit down and I would journal with my pencil. And at the end I'd have this big pencil smear down my left hand. So, the great thing is if you write in Hebrew, if you're left-handed, you actually have the advantage for once and you don't get the pencil smear. So, haha, that's nice. Actually, I will share one more thing with you about that just because I kind of like to make these little snapshots fun. This is my Hebrew letters coffee cup, which is very famous. It's like my hallmark. And generally, if you're left-handed, it's a ripoff because they always put the picture on the mug so the right-hander can sit there in the morning with their mug and they can look at the nice picture on their coffee cup. If you're left-handed, it's on the wrong side, so you get a blank thing. What's great about this mug is that it has the Hebrew letters all the way around. So even as a left-hander, I can still see some of the Hebrew letters. It's so nice. And by the way, if you do Hebrew Quest, the 40 Lessons of Hebrew Quest at holylanguage.com, we'll send you a congratulatory certificate and we'll send you one of these mugs. Very, very cool. All right, so the word I want to look at with you here is, he says, so iatem, don't you modim, don't you agree li, with me. This Hebrew word here that has the meaning agree, it's a big word in Hebrew. It means to confess. It means to give thanks. It means to praise. And then here, as you can see, it means to agree with. Maybe your mind is already chugging away. Maybe you're getting some spiritual revelation right now. Maybe you're already having these aha moments that the Hebrew word to confess, to give thanks, to praise, and to agree with is all the same word. Okay, I'm going to show you a dictionary entry here. This is from Harkavy's Dictionary of Biblical Hebrew. You can get it from the recommended resources page at holylanguage.com in PDF format. Here's the verb. The verb is yada, and it literally means to throw or to shoot. So for instance, it can have the sense of throwing a stone. Maybe when you were a kid you liked chucking rocks, then you really like this word. Yada means to chuck rocks. Or maybe you had a bow and arrow set, and you like to shoot arrows. Well, again, yada can have the sense of shooting an arrow. Now, what's interesting about this, though, that's literally what it means. Hebrew is a cool language because it's very action oriented. Every word in Hebrew is formed from a 3-letter verbal root like this. And then also it's very concrete physical language, all right? So this is an example. This is the physical action behind the Hebrew word to confess, to give thanks, to praise, and to agree with. What's the connection, you might be asking? How does that work? Well, here's how I see it. When you when you're confessing, giving thanks, praising, basically what you're doing is verbalizing something. And so it's almost just like you would throw a rock, you're throwing words out of your mouth. And if you're saying mean things to someone, that's a very meaningful picture also. You're chucking rocks out of your mouth at somebody. It's like you're stoning them to death just with the cruel things or the unkind things or the insensitive things you're saying. That's a meaningful picture in the Hebrew language in and of itself. So, if you're saying something, it's almost like your words are arrows that are being shot out of your mouth, for better or worse. Hopefully towards a specific target, unless you just shoot your mouth off, so to speak, which sometimes happens with some people. All right, so can you see how Hebrew is so meaningful? Okay, so here's the word yada, and then it goes on to show some examples of how it's used in the Hebrew Bible and some different forms that it takes grammatically speaking. For instance, in Psalms it says, I will give you thanks, so I will yada. Now, what's interesting about this word is the word play behind the name Judah. Remember Leah and her sister Rachel were in this kind of childbearing race thing, and so she finally had her 4th child, and she said, this time I'm going to thank God, and so she named him Judah. What's the connection? Well, okay, the word there for thanking is yada. So what did she name him? Yehudah. It has a sense of I will thank, I will give thanks, right? So that's the word. So that's very meaningful in and of itself, because the Jewish people today are named after the tribe of Judah. Yehudah is Judah, and then the Jewish people are the Yehudim. So in Hebrew, if you're Jewish, you're Yehudi. So it's very powerful right there. The word to be Jewish is the word to give thanks to God, to praise God. What are Jewish people famous for? Lots of things, being smart. But in this case, praying. How many times a day does a Jewish person say, Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you, Lord our God? It's hardwired into the Jewish soul to bless God. And it's very powerful because this word Judah literally means to bless God, to give thanks to him in that regard. All right. And you actually see some wordplay along those lines when Jacob was blessing Judah. He said, Yehudah, Judah, your brothers will, and then it says, Yoducha, they will yada you. So what's interesting about that is, remember how we just learned that this word also means to agree with? He's saying, Judah, your brothers will agree with you. It's probably actually the best sense of the word there. But it's kind of neat because this is an example of Hebrew wordplay that you're totally going to miss in a translation. All right, so let's keep looking at this. It had the sense of giving thanks, praising. You can see here there's an instance of how it means to praise. And then it also can have the sense of confessing your sins. So this is a really big word in Hebrew. And as you just learned, it can also have the sense of agreeing with. Now, having said that, let's look at a couple places where this concept turns up in the teachings of Yeshua of Nazareth and in the writings of his apostles. Yeshua said, everyone who confesses me before men, I will also confess him before my Father who is in heaven. All right. So now you have, hopefully, a better sense of what it means to confess Yeshua. Now, you'll notice here that we're reading an English translation, obviously. And this is a translation from the Greek. But something important to remember, firstly, is that Matthew was originally written in Hebrew. The early church fathers were pretty much unanimously agreed about that. So even if you believe that the rest of the New Testament was written in Greek, you have to acknowledge that Matthew was originally written in Hebrew. All right. So here's a big question. What was the Hebrew word that was used in this original gospel? There are some versions of the Hebrew Matthew floating around. We don't know if any of them are originals or not. They probably weren't. But, they're definitely closer. And that's the first thing we need to recognize. The second thing we need to recognize is that even if, regardless of which language you're reading the New Testament in, you need to remember that the context of the New Testament is Jewish. The New Testament is about Jesus and his disciples, and they all grew up in Israel as Jewish people, speaking Hebrew and Aramaic, and then of course Paul also. He said he grew up in Jerusalem. He described himself as a Hebrew of Hebrews. I'm not saying that everyone has to become Jewish, obviously. I'm not saying you have to understand Hebrew to have a relationship with God, obviously. But if you really want to understand the New Testament, context is a big deal. Everyone is going to agree that you need to read the Bible in context or you're going to make up some really crazy stuff. All right? So just remember that. The context of the New Testament is Jewish. And this is an example of that. The Hebrew linguistic context of the New Testament. Yeshua is talking about confessing him. This is kind of important, if you want to have a good relationship with him, confessing him. So what does it actually mean to confess him is the question. And now you know the Hebrew word to confess. And indeed, when we look at a Hebrew version of the Gospel of Matthew, we see that the verb yada is indeed used. So confessing Yeshua, it doesn't just mean you stand up and give your testimony before your church necessarily. Yeah, that can be a part of it, but it's bigger than that. Confessing Yeshua is like verbalizing your relationship with Yeshua. It's like acknowledging with your speech, where you're at with him. And, it's giving thanks for him and to him. It has that sense of praise. And it also, as we're learning here, it means to agree with. So confessing Yeshua means that you agree with Yeshua in what you say. And hopefully also in how you do life. What you do, how you spend your time. So can you see that confessing Yeshua is actually, it's more than just this one-time little confession that you might do with your mouth. It's like a lifestyle thing. Confessing Yeshua is a lifestyle thing. It's all about agreeing with the Master. All right, I want to show you one more instance of this. And this is kind of a salvation issue. Paul, for instance, in Romans, he says, if you confess with your mouth the Master Yeshua and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. Now, there are two ways this is actually phrased in Christian translations. More newer English translations will say something like, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord. Now, what is that saying? That you need, is this some kind of little magical formula or a special little phrase that you need to say to get in? Jesus is Lord, it's the password. No, that's not what it's talking about. The older King James version actually, I think, gives a better sense of the original Greek, and then also of the broader concept, what it actually just means. It's not just about saying the little phrase Jesus is Lord, or maybe slapping that as a bumper sticker on the back of your motorcycle. No, it's more than that. It's confessing with your mouth him. So what does that mean? Now you have a better sense of that. Now have a better sense of what it means to confess with your mouth the Master Yeshua. It means that you agree with him in what you say. It means you agree with him in your whole life. I think this, and actually this is interesting. Let's have a look at this here. If you're wondering about what the Greek is here, the Greek is actually very much supportive of this. So here's the Strong's number, and then the Greek word is homologeo, and it's actually a contraction of two words. Homo is the same, and then logeo is related to logos, word. So it means saying the same thing, essentially. And when you look at Thayer's definition, it very much says the same thing as what I'm saying here. Or maybe I'm saying the same thing as what it says. But either way, to say the same thing as another, i.e. to agree with or to assent. So, even in the Greek, basically to confess means to agree with someone, to say the same thing as them. And again, if we're looking at that in the context of our whole lives as disciples, that doesn't just mean we're saying the same thing with our mouths. It means we're saying the same things with what we do, with our entire lifestyles. And this is really important. This is a big deal because there's this question about what it means to confess Jesus. I mean, it's a big deal. Paul says this is part of your salvation experience and how you experience it, right? So it's a big deal. Now, I want to talk with you for a minute, just to wrap this thought up, about Jewish people specifically. Let's say that you grew up in a Jewish household, and at some point in your life you came to believe in Yeshua as the Mashiach, the Messiah. Or let's say that you're in a church and you know someone who's Jewish and they just came to believe in Jesus. What do they do? What does it mean to confess Yeshua? Does that mean that you need to go to let's say that you have a synagogue that you go to or whatever, that you grew up in. Does that mean you need to go there the next Saturday morning for the prayer service and jump up and stand on your chair in the middle of the service and start singing? Like, I believe in Jesus. Like, is that confessing Jesus? If you don't do that, will you be saved? Is that what it means? Or do you need to start telling every single Jewish person you know that you believe in Jesus now? Is that what confessing Yeshua means? If you don't do that, does that mean he's going to be embarrassed of you when he comes back? The answer to that is no. Yeah, that's not the case. Often, if a Jewish person comes to believe in Yeshua as the Messiah, they'll be rejected by their Jewish family and by the Jewish community because as not being Jewish anymore, as having rejected Judaism. And you know what? I can see why that happens, because historically, very often when Jewish people came to believe in Yeshua, they walked away from the Torah, they rejected Judaism, and they joined a church and just assimilated into the Gentile world. And I don't think that's the way it has to be. You look at the first century, Jesus was Jewish. His early followers were all Jewish. And just because they believed in Jesus didn't mean they stopped being Jewish. And it also didn't mean that they stopped practicing Judaism or that they stopped observing the Torah. Paul included. In Acts chapter 21, he was doing animal sacrifices in Jerusalem to publicly demonstrate that he still kept the law. That's a big deal. I think we all need to take that to heart. And that's the context in which we need to read Paul's letters, right? So faith in Jesus doesn't mean you should stop being Jewish. If anything, that should make you more Jewish. And what that means is it should actually, in my opinion, bring you closer to the Jewish community. So if you're a Jewish person and you believe in Yeshua, I encourage you, stay as close to the Jewish community as you can. Stay as involved as you can, because you are representing Yeshua. It doesn't mean that you have to start jumping up in the middle of prayer services and shouting about Jesus. Like, please don't do that. That's not representing Yeshua well. That's not sensitive. Paul would be not happy with you if you did something like that, in my opinion. All right. So, I just want to encourage you, it just means that you agree with him when you talk about stuff, and that you agree with him in how you live your life. It's possible to believe in Yeshua and to do so quietly in the context of the Jewish community, and that doesn't mean that you've denied the master, and it doesn't mean that you're not confessing him. All right. So if you're a Jewish person, that would be my encouragement to you. Stay as involved in the Jewish community as you can. Don't feel bad if you're not always talking about your new faith in Yeshua. It doesn't mean you're a bad disciple. It doesn't mean you're not confessing him. Just, of course you love him. Of course you have a meaningful relationship with him. Of course you have a strong faith in him. And of course you're willing to confess him, and that's what's important. So, if he does come up in conversations, and there's ways to talk about him in a tasteful way, in a sensitive way, in a respectful way, do that. You probably wouldn't even want to do that on synagogue property if you want to be respectful. But maybe one-on-one over coffee or something, that would be, in my opinion, a little more sensitive and appropriate. And it probably would go over better too. And again, it's going to help you to keep that good relationship with the Jewish community that I believe Yeshua, who was, is, and will always be a Jewish rabbi and the King of the Jews, that's how he'd want it. Anyways, that's how I see things. And hopefully looking at this Hebrew word for confession gives you a bit of a better understanding of what it means, regardless of whether you're coming from a Jewish or non-Jewish background, what it means to confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus, confessing our Master Yeshua. All right, so that was what I had for you here today, just to back up. Looking at this passage from the Mishnah, where Rabbi Akiva says, "Don't you agree with me? Don't you yada with me?" Hopefully, this was meaningful for you. This is an example of how reading the old Jewish writings can help us to understand Yeshua and the writing of his disciples in the New Testament. Just understand it all better. Hopefully, it even has contributed to your relationship with Yeshua in a personal way. We talk about these things. I have lessons that come out every week at holylanguage.com. This is a takeaway from Mishnah Snapshots lesson number 28. I would love to have you join us for the whole lesson. We talked about a ton of other really neat stuff. Come see us at holylanguage.com. Consider joining. It's $20 a month, so it's very affordable, and it'll give you membership in our community, access to everything on our website, and it will definitely take your relationship with Yeshua and your understanding of the Bible to a whole new level, if that's something you want and that's something you're willing to invest your time and energy in. All right, thanks again for joining me, and shalom.